and his uniform. That's interesting. He would have been targeted and mistreated and probably beaten by the local people just for being affiliated with the NAACP. So he had to hide that relationship. But here was his uniform that his grandfather had used. I mean, that was in full view in his house. And so this was a news to me. I had never heard of this before. But when I tell this story, I tell this to young people all the time. Because I did not know then. That's one day, 40 years later, I would be a city council member here in Washington, D.C., and I would lead a drive to build the first ever monument to these soldiers in the history of the United States. So I tell young people this: if you have your dream, don't ever give it up, because you never know. Dr. King says the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward freedom and justice. So it may take you a long time to get where you're trying to go, but don't ever give up, because you haven't lost until you quit. And you never give up. You never know what's going to happen. So I didn't know then that one day these two things will come together here and I'd be able to build a monument in D.C. Now I have to caution you all of this. I'm 68 years old now. When I get 70 years old, I'm going to start lying about this. So I'm telling you the truth. I'm going to start telling people I knew that day that someday in the future I would be a council member in Washington, D.C., representing the historic U Street community near Howard University. And there on that pile of land, I was going to build a national monument that would list all these names that would be dedicated to the glory and honor of those men whose uniform Henry Reed showed me in 1963. I'm not old enough to die like that right now, but I'm getting close. But I wanted to share that with you because I wanted you to know that it had taken some time, but also by the time, of course, we got around to trying to build this monument, I was on the city council here in Washington, D.C. I had read virtually every book I could find. By then, I knew more about them than anybody in the United States. I still do. That's my job. I have more books and materials and articles and documents. I didn't know this, but I was introduced at something in Mississippi a few years ago, and the guy who introduced me said that he had met me back when I was a civil rights worker. He said I was the only person he ever knew who read more than one book at a time. I do that. I have about 4 or 5 books around my bed. If I start reading this one, I don't like that, I put it down. You got to grab me in a hurry. Doesn't grab me, I put that one down and get me another one. So I have a bunch of them over there. Either one time I'm reading a lot of different books. And sometimes I read junk books too. I'm not always serious. I read novels and love stories and things like that. But I do enjoy reading about this material. It's exciting to me, it's fascinating to me, because this is a story of black people who come to the United States as enslaved people. When the Civil War starts, there is 4.3 million black people living in the United States. 3.9 million of them are slaves. So if you meet somebody who tells you that their parents were never slaves, they weren't living in the United States when the Civil War started. 3.9 million of them were slaves. Now, not all black people, but 400,000 of them were free. And we know about some of those free blacks. We know about Frederick Douglass. He was free, but he had been a slave, right? Harriet Tubman, we know about her. We know about Harriet's great exploits with the Underground Railroad, leading people to their freedom. With all the heroic efforts of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, and all the runaways like me who would have been a runaway, slavery was never going to end without a war. There were 3.9 million blacks living here as slaves. If you come to our museum right now, you'll see a bill of sale for a young lady on our wall who was, I think she was 11 years old, who was sold for $600 back in 1834. We have another bill of sale for a woman who was sold for $1,000. So a big, strong guy like that over there, he probably would have got about $2,000 for him. So, I don't know about that, though. He seemed to be distracted, so he might have brought about $1,500. But the fact of the matter is this, y'all. If you take 3.9 million people who are chattel slaves in the United States, and you put a value of $1,000 each on them, that's almost $4 billion in 1860 money. $4 billion in 1860 money. Slavery is never going to end without a war. Okay? It's not going to end without a war. That's just the value of the slaves themselves. That doesn't count the cotton that they grow, the tobacco that they grow, the rice that they grow, and how this gets put into commerce. The cotton gets turned into cloth, and the cloth gets sold in Europe, and the tobacco turns into cigars, and of course we eat the rice and all that stuff. These people have become an integral part of this economy, and some economists say that slavery contributed to 72% of the GNP of America during its time. Slavery was never going to end without a war. never going to end without a war. Thank God that these Southerners decided to fire on Fort Sumter to start this war. So slavery is never going to end without a war. And Lincoln goes into battle saying, I'm not going to do anything about slavery because what I want to do is to save the Union. He says this for 2 years. And he says in his own words, what I do about slavery, I do only to save the Union. And people get angry at him because they say, well, he should have been saying slavery was wrong. Because it was wrong. You all know that, right? Painful and wrong and outrageous. He should have been saying that. He wasn't saying that. He was saying, I got to save the Union. That's all I really care about. And if I have to do something about slavery, I will. But I don't want to do it unless I have to. So he goes for 2 years, really losing this war, before he decides that he has to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, paragraph 6 of which says, able-bodied persons, or it says, to be more correct, persons of suitable condition will be enrolled in the Union Army. And let me tell you how he did this, y'all.